Rain slicked the driveway in sheets, and the cold air bit through my jacket as I stepped out of the fire truck. My boots left shallow impressions in the wet asphalt. The lights of the station faded behind me, replaced by the dull gray of a Saturday afternoon. I should have felt relief. Overtime was over. But something in my gut told me the storm waiting at home was worse than any blaze I'd faced. By the time I reached the front steps, the chaos had already started. My books and laptop were scattered across the lawn, water soaking the pages and wires like a scene from a nightmare. And there she was, Jenna, leaning out of the second-story window, her hair plastered to her forehead, eyes glittering with a fury I barely recognized. Around her, two friends hovered on the porch, tense with anticipation, like spectators at a spectacle they were desperate not to miss. I froze, chest tightening, as she flicked her hand and a wet notebook landed at my feet. "Call the cops if you want," she spat, her voice sharp as broken glass. "They'll believe me." Her smirk was a dare, a challenge wrapped in satisfaction. I felt the sting of her nails on my cheek, raw against the rain. My own home, the one place I thought safe, had been turned into a theater of humiliation. I took a deep breath, tasting iron and rain, and looked at the pile of belongings. Every item told a story of years I'd lived, of quiet evenings, laughter, and routine. And now it was all mud and water, tossed aside as collateral for her anger. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, trained to run into fire and chaos, faced with a storm I couldn't control, my wife, enraged, using her friends as witnesses, scripting a story where I was the villain. And yet, even in that tension, I felt the old weight of fear and loneliness lifting slightly. Not entirely, never entirely, but enough to know I wasn't as cornered as she believed. I reached into my pocket, fingering the phone, the lifeline I hadn't thought I'd need. The rain traced cold lines down my face, mingling with the scratches, and for the first time in months, I saw something beyond this moment. A memory, a connection, a secret that might still tip the scales. Mike 36, firefighter. Rain pouring, life in ruins, but a quiet resolve settling like embers in my chest. The storm had started, but it hadn't decided the outcome yet. I didn't move. My boots pressed into the wet grass, mud seeping between the soles, but my mind was elsewhere, calculating, waiting, measuring. Every second that passed made her smile grow. Jenna thrived on this, on control, on the performance of power. She had orchestrated it perfectly, friends as witnesses, a stormy afternoon, and a man she assumed would crumble. The scratches on my cheek burned, more from disbelief than pain. I had thought I knew her, loved her even. But standing there, watching her laugh through her fury, I realized how little I truly understood the woman I'd married 2 years ago. The fire in her eyes, once alluring, had turned sharp and unrecognizable. It wasn't passion, it was strategy. I allowed myself a quiet breath, letting the rain wash over me, and in that silence I remembered something. My brother. Kevin. My older brother, the one I hadn't spoken to in 15 years after a fight that had shattered our bond. I had told him things would work out, that life moves on, but we never truly had. Until recently. 6 months ago, he'd returned to the city. One beer turned into many, one dinner into a weekly ritual. Slowly, awkwardly, the trust had begun to rebuild, piece by piece. Jenna had no idea. She saw my estrangement from Kevin as weakness, a chink in the armor she thought I wore. She had never counted on that connection, the secret tied to someone who could walk through fire for me, not metaphorically, but literally, in uniform, with authority and power. I slid my phone from my pocket, fingers brushing against the smooth edge. One message. That was all it would take. Code 10 to 34. Our childhood signal, half joke, half lifeline. It meant trouble. It meant need. It meant my brother. She had crafted a perfect lie, but she had underestimated one thing, the bond she could never know, the blood that couldn't be rewritten. I glanced up at her again. Her smirk faltered slightly as if sensing something, but no. She shook her head, dismissing it, confident, untouchable. My life lay scattered on the lawn, my dignity in tatters, but in that quiet heartbeat, I felt the shift. The storm hadn't broken me. Not yet. And in that tension, I made my choice. I didn't reach for 911. I reached for my brother. The rain fell harder, soaking my hair, dripping into my eyes, but I saw clearly. The first move had been hers, but the next one, my next one, would change everything. The distant wail of a siren cut through the rain, faint at first, then growing, a pulse racing toward us. Jenna's smirk didn't falter, but I saw the first tremor of doubt flicker in her eyes. She thought she had rehearsed every outcome, anticipated every response, but she hadn't accounted for Kevin. Time slowed. My hand tightened on the phone, my pulse thundering in my ears. Memories of childhood flashed, Kevin protecting me from bullies, standing taller and fiercer than anyone else in the playground. He had been my shield then, and he would be now. I pressed send, the code brief and urgent. I watched the rain ripple across the lawn, washing dirt and chaos into dark puddles. The pile of my belongings, once symbols of home and security, now lay like battlefield debris. My chest tightened as the siren drew closer. She gestured at the mess, at the scratches on my face, daring me to crumble, daring me to call the wrong number. She had assumed isolation would break me, but I wasn't alone. Not really. 2 black and white cruisers rounded the corner, lights spinning, cutting through gray mist. Jenna's eyes widened, and for the first time, the arrogance faltered. The officers leapt from the cars, cautious and alert, scanning the scene like soldiers entering an unknown battlefield. And then, through the haze and rain, I saw him. Kevin. Jeans, jacket, his presence immediate, commanding. The familiar curve of his jaw, the set of his shoulders. It was like looking at the brother I had once known, older, sharper, unshakable. He stepped forward, moving past the uniformed officers as if they were part of the scenery. His gaze locked on mine, and something ancient and unspoken passed between us: protection, loyalty, a bond forged in fire and pain, years old but unbroken. "Don't worry, little brother," he said, voice low and steady, meant only for me. The words cut through the chaos. In that instant, the ground shifted. Jenna's performance had no anchor anymore. Her friends stiffened, unsure, exposed. The storm she had controlled for hours had met its equal. Kevin's eyes swept the scene, the soaked books, the scattered laptop, the shredded notebooks, and he nodded once, quietly, almost imperceptibly, before turning to his team with authority. Every decision, every word, was precise. The balance of power had shifted, and for the first time in hours, I felt the tension loosen, the possibility of safety threading through the rain. And in that pause, in that glance from my brother, I realized something fundamental. The fight wasn't over, but it no longer had to be mine alone. Kevin didn't rush. He moved with precision, scanning the porch where Jenna and her friends had staged themselves, each step measured, calm, deliberate. I stayed a step behind him, soaked through, mud seeping into my socks, hard hammering, not with fear, but with a fragile hope I hadn't felt in years. The storm above us drummed on the roof, but it felt distant compared to the storm that had erupted in my life. Jenna's eyes met mine, and for the first time, the confidence she had wielded like a weapon wavered. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, voice high and brittle. "He's mine. He'll pay." Kevin didn't answer. He raised his hand and signaled to the officers. "Separate them. Statements. Every detail." His words were crisp, professional, yet each syllable carried a weight that Jenna hadn't calculated. The officers moved like clockwork, guiding her and her friends onto the porch in opposite directions. Panic flickered across Jenna's face as she realized the narrative she had crafted was slipping through her fingers. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the shaking in my arms. My throat was tight, and the scratches on my cheek stung with every movement. This was it. My life, my home, my dignity, all laid bare. The humiliation had been deliberate, public, designed to break me. Yet, standing behind my brother, I felt a new strength rising. I wasn't alone. I hadn't been abandoned by fate or family. Kevin turned to me, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "Tell me everything," he said. His voice was low, private. Not officer to citizen, but brother to brother. The floodgates opened. I spoke of the dinner reservation, the staged confrontation, the scratches, the friends cheering her on, the subtle manipulations she'd woven for years. I spoke without anger, without embellishment, only the truth, letting it spill into the rain-soaked air. He listened, nodding, recording, analyzing. Every detail mattered, every word a piece of the puzzle. When I finished, he gave a single glance to the porch, then back at me. That glance carried a promise. Justice isn't given, it's claimed, and it will be claimed tonight. I realized then that the fight had never been about proving myself to Jenna. It had been about reclaiming the life she tried to obliterate and protecting the parts of myself, and my family, that she couldn't touch. The storm of rain and mud faded into insignificance compared to the storm of betrayal and fear that had defined the last 2 years. And in that moment, with Kevin between me and the chaos, I understood that the reckoning was inevitable. Jenna had assumed victory. But she had misjudged everything. The stage was set, the pieces in motion, and the tide had turned. The porch seemed smaller than I remembered, crowded with fear and pretense. Jenna's friends were trembling now, unsure, their rehearsed lines faltering. Her performance had been flawless for hours, but the moment Kevin stepped in, the illusion cracked. Kevin pulled out a small device from his jacket. "Watch this," he said, voice calm, steady, eyes under fire. A security camera feed flickered to life on the screen, the second-story window, the rain pouring, every book, every laptop, every notebook hurled into the mud. And then Jenna, lunging at me, claws scraping across my cheek. Not a trace of provocation on my part. Not a single act of aggression. The world narrowed to that moment. Rain dripping from the eaves, water running into my boots, and the sight of the truth displayed in stark, unyielding clarity. The faces on the porch went pale. Amy's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Lisa turned away, her hands shaking. And Jenna froze. Her eyes, once filled with triumph, widened into disbelief, horror, then sheer panic. Kevin stepped closer, voice low but carrying over the tension. "Ma'am, you are alleging that your husband assaulted you. Is that correct?" "Yes," she whispered, voice cracking, the rehearsed rage replaced by instinctual fear. He held the screen toward her and her friends. "Do you see this? This is what actually happened." For a heartbeat, nothing moved except the rain. Then realization hit, sharp and final. Her lips trembled. "No, that's not real, it's edited." Kevin's hand lifted, signaling the officers. "You're under arrest for domestic assault. Your friends will be questioned for filing a false report." The sound of handcuffs clicking echoed in the soaked silence, a drumbeat of justice. Jenna's eyes met mine one last time, a venomous mix of hatred and disbelief, but her power was gone. Every calculated lie, every manipulated witness, every ounce of control she thought she wielded evaporated in the authority and truth my brother brought to the scene. I stayed silent, mud and rain dripping from my hair, chest tight with exhaustion and release. I didn't feel glee, didn't feel triumph. I felt emptiness, yes, but also clarity. The storm had passed. The chaos had a boundary now. I was no longer the man standing alone on his lawn in humiliation. Kevin placed a hand on my shoulder, steadying me against the cold. "You're safe now," he said. Simple words, heavy with everything left unspoken between us for 15 years. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The rain had stopped by the time we returned to my house, leaving the air crisp and the lawn muddy but still standing. The chaos of the afternoon lingered in the smell of wet paper and overturned furniture, but it no longer had the power to overwhelm me. The storm had passed, and for the first time, I could breathe without hesitation. Kevin guided me inside, and for a moment, we simply stood in the hallway, listening to the quiet. No sirens, no shouting, no performance, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant drip of water from the eaves. I felt the weight of months, maybe years, lifting off my shoulders. The tension I had carried, the fear, the isolation, the humiliation, was finally dissipating. I was not alone. Not truly. We didn't speak at first, only moved through the house, restoring what we could. Broken books were stacked, a laptop wiped down, personal items returned to some semblance of order. When I found the shattered frame of my father's photograph in the mud, my chest tightened. I carefully picked it up, brushed away the dirt, and traced my fingers over the broken glass. A symbol of what she had tried to destroy, yes, but also of resilience. I set it aside to be repaired, a reminder that what matters cannot be obliterated with cruelty. That night Kevin stayed. We cooked together, silently at first, letting the routine speak louder than words. And then we talked about our father, the years apart, the fights that had driven us to estrangement. About fear, anger, regret, and the stubbornness that had kept us distant. For the first time in 15 years, it felt like family again, messy, imperfect, but real. The divorce was finalized weeks later, the legal aftermath clean, almost clinical. Jenna faced consequences she had never imagined, but I didn't focus on that. My satisfaction was quiet. The real victory was the restoration of life and trust, the reclamation of home and heart. I now move through my days with a calm I didn't expect, the kind that comes from knowing who stands beside you, and that even the fire you walk into can be survived. The bond with my brother is stronger than ever. We plan trips, share meals, and honor the memory of the father we both loved fiercely. As I sit by the window, rain gently tapping against the glass, I realize that life is not about avoiding storms, it's about standing in the rain, knowing you are not alone, and that the fire in your life can be faced without fear. I survived. I reclaimed my home. I reclaimed my family. And for the first time, the world feels steady beneath my feet.